So I find that changing people's perspective to really look at their money and what the return will be as far as income goes is pretty eye-opening to most people.
Welcome to the Freedom Point Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about creating more time freedom through passive real estate investing. Passive investing in real estate challenges conventional investment wisdom. We are passionate about learning and sharing resources with others who are ready to transform their investing mindset. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer, ADP. I'm glad you're here. Now let's dig in. All right, welcome back, Freedom Point Podcast listeners. Thank you again for jumping into another episode of the Freedom Point. We're so thankful you're here with us today. Really excited to have Stephanie Walter on the line with us today. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Really appreciate you being here with us today. A little short bio on Stephanie before we get started. Stephanie is a successful capital raiser who raised over $30 million, currently has over $300 million in assets under management. She's recognized from her wealthy investors that she's worked with that there are relatively unknown tax strategies that allow real estate investors to leverage a bank to, number one, set up tax-free retirement cash flow. Number two, use a bank to pay for the real estate taxes. And number three, avoid paying 40% or more of your wealth to the government. Stephanie, I can't think of anything more important to talk about that really gets in the way of people's wealth building strategies than taxes and inflation. So I know we're not here to talk about the latter. We're here to talk about the former. So maybe you can help our listening audience maybe learn a little bit more about you, what you're focused on today, and maybe kind of bring us up to to the present.
Yeah, well, I got involved in syndications in 2018 and raised, a significant amount of money to get some assets under management, but just found that I was a general partner, and my partner and I had a lot of differences once we started acquiring these properties on how we thought about communication and stuff like that. So it was, and a lot of the managing was sort of out of my control as well. Didn't really know, because when I got into syndications, I was brand new. Didn't really understand, different things that could have gone awry. So for me, I just, my background was in insurance. I had run an agency for 16 years before jumping out and getting into syndications. But from my wealthy investors, I learned that they were doing these different strategic things with life insurance that I'd never seen before in all my years of being an insurance agent. And so I find that it's such an unusual thing to talk about, but super, like with my own investments, is taxing is usually the last thing that we address as real estate investors. I mean, maybe the cost segregation and stuff like that, but we're always like struggling when we get a liquidity event of what we're doing with the money. And we're very focused on cash flow, which is excellent, but this strategy is having you leverage a bank to get tax-free income, which again is kind of an elevated thing. But I find that wealthy people, they view money differently. They also are strategically looking at taxes all the time. And like you said, I think that those are the two things that eat away at our wealth for sure, is inflation and taxes.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly inflation more so in the last, few years. For sure. So, there's lots of different ways that people that are trying to, build up their wealth and maintain their wealth, choose to invest. Some are obviously, maybe if they're employed, they're maxing out their 401k, they're stocking money, into IRAs. They're, purchasing index funds, they're listening to, whatever their financial advisor tells them to do. Maybe they're investing in real estate, actively or passively, or into other alternative, asset classes. Why would you say, or what would you say about, the reasons why people shouldn't be, dead set focused on always overfunding their 401k plans specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I basically you shouldn't overfund it. Like if your person is matching it, if your employer is matching it, I think it's still a good strategy. But what people don't realize is the effect that taxes have on this, on their nest egg. I'll just use easy math. Let's say you save $1 million in your 401k. When you retire, considering we're going to keep tax rates around 30%, is what I'm going to assume, even though it's very likely they're going to be much higher than that when the person goes to retire. They can take $40,000 out a year. That's before taxes have been applied to that money. Once taxes get applied to it, it's around $28,000 a year. So I don't think most people save up and scrimp and everything like that to get $1 million saved and to get $28,000 a year when they retire. So I find that people changing people's perspective to really look at their money and what the return will be as far as income goes is pretty eye opening to most people.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. I'm glad that you highlighted the fact that just because you've achieved $1 million balance in your 401k doesn't mean you have $1 million in spending power at some point, in the future, because you haven't yet paid taxes, on that income yet. So really appreciate you highlighting, that out. In addition to that, obviously, is things like inflation and lifestyle creep, right? Most people, I think, if they look at their 401k balance, even though they might have been contributing, to that 401k plan for the last 20 to 30 years, let's take a look at what that balance is retrospective to the amount of income that you spend, on an annual basis, and how many years, is that 401k, plan, so to speak, really going to take you, out over time. So really appreciate you highlighting that. Can you help explain for our listening audience, which is made up of primarily, real estate investors, mostly on the limited partner passive side? Can you explain how real estate investors can set up tax-free retirement cash flow using the strategies that you suggest?
Yeah, there's a couple different strategies that we use, kind of depending on the person. So one of the strategies we're really utilizing a lot right now is they're both the underlying policy that we're talking about is an index universal life, which was rolled out in 2006. A lot of people are like, oh, is that the same thing as being your own bank? And that book was written by Nash, I forget his first name, in I think 2000, or so his book doesn't even address this. So this is really new and improved type of insurance that people can use for this. One way that we use, I'll reference a few tax codes, very interesting to everybody, is TAMRA and TEFRA. In 1988, they said that the government said that you can't like funnel a whole bunch of money into life insurance. So they were able to. So the way that we structure these policies is to get the most insurance for the least amount of money. What is interesting is in 2020, I believe it was the end of 2020, there was a COVID relief bill, and snuck deep inside that COVID relief bill was a little clause that changed TAMRA a little bit, which allowed you to buy less insurance. They reduced the minimum amount, and people are always like, "What? Why would they do that?" I say because the politicians take advantage of this type of strategy, and they use it all the time. So that That being said, about 5% of all policies are set up this way. So you really have to work with someone that understands these IRS laws and everything like that. But one way to do it would be called a strategic rollout. It's not a strategic rollover, it's a strategic rollout because Trump in 2017 passed, I think it was called the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which lowered the marginal tax rates brackets. And so, actually, if you have a 401k, it's a good time to look at it because you've got about 3 years to roll money over with low taxes associated with it. Sometimes we can look at what deductions you have it and things like that, and you won't have to really pay a lot of taxes in order to roll that money over. Usually takes about 3 to 5 years to roll the money all over into a completely tax-free product. The other part, which is very attractive to real estate investors, is called premium financing insurance. And that's where we take advantage of a loan that is given to us by a bank. So think of it very similar to real estate, where you can take ownership of a commercial building by having the bank put down 80% and you put down 20%. Now, this is for higher net worth people. You have to be an accredited investor to even start looking at this. And so by having, as you guys, as we're all familiar with leverage, if we're investing in real estate, leverage really improves the IRR on this policy, and provides, and really is having a bank contribute to your tax-free income. What's nice is if you use tax, or if you're using real estate to qualify for this, you can actually just submit like a letter of credit from your bank as collateral, which is very low. It's very easy to qualify for this loan if you qualify. So the way that the bank takes their money out is we work this policy to be set up to build wealth. And in the year 13 or 14, the bank takes all their money out of the policy, and then the turbocharged policy is really set up to provide tax-free income, and it's a great strategy to have along with your real estate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for clarifying that and for highlighting. You had mentioned at one point that avoiding paying 40% or more of your wealth to the government. Could you elaborate on how these, tax strategies would help a higher net worth individual, use or deploy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what is also happening is estate taxes are sunsetting at the end of this year. So let's say that we have someone that owns, I don't know, maybe 40, $50 million in real estate, and they don't address their estate taxes. After the end of this year, I believe it goes down to $14 million from $26 million. So anything that your estate is valued over $14 million, so $15 million, let's say you die with that $1 million after $14 million is taxed at 40% federally. Now, that's assuming that you have no state taxes. So depending on where you are, you may be hit with another, estate tax, which would bring it up to around 50%. So why this should matter for real estate people is, if you've got a nice portfolio and everything, and you don't want to think about that you may have to have a fire sale for your heirs, for your children, and selling, as we all know, it's very dependent on the market. Now is not the best time to sell for most people because they're giving fairly big discounts. So by having that money, a lot of people don't want to do that to their heirs. So this policy could be set up to have a bank really fund their estate, their future estate taxes that will come due. And they can keep their money to be investing in other things.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, most of the listening audience, my suspicion tells me, are those income earners that, maybe they are accredited or borderline accredited. Most listening to this have a net worth of around 1 million, excluding the primary residence that they live in, right? Most are, busy professionals, in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, right? That still love what they do. They're, grinding out their W-2 each year. For that type of an investor profile, what maybe be one thing that investor ought to consider, changing or tweaking, before the end of this calendar year?
I would say consulting to see if we could start strategically rolling out some of their money, because they're in really, even though you're probably in your top earning years, you're actually in, you have many, many deductions to work with the tax code. The older you are, the less deductions you have to work with. And overall, underlying this, it is a life insurance policy. So the younger and healthier you are, the cheaper the cost of insurance, and the more value that this can achieve. And for the less wealthy people, so the $1 million, we have a product which is called the match, and that allows a bank to contribute $1 million to your policy. The cool thing about this is there's no collateral that's required, and there's no hard pull on your credit. So it's actually, to me, this is offered at a fixed rate of 5%. So it's very hard to go wrong with using this bank's money with those terms involved with it.
Now, I would imagine when it comes to funding, a life insurance policy or a whole term policy that, one could, invest that way using cash. But I think what I heard maybe earlier is there is an opportunity or an option to look at rolling some active and former 401k IRA monies into a policy. Am I hearing that correct?
Yes, yes. And this is a really great time to do that, to take advantage of the lower tax rates we're in right now.
Now, can somebody roll over an active 401k amount from their current employer?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's a roll out, not a rollover. Yes.
Got it. Okay. And what would be the first thing that particular investor would have to do in order to start that process? Is it some sort of a consultation call with you to determine, what those specific options are, what their, maybe goals are in terms of achieving? Are there any limits to the amount that they can, roll out of, their active 401k and into a term policy insurance?
Yeah, there are definitely limits of what can be achieved. So it's great to have a conversation with me, kind of go over everybody's goals and really their retirement goals, and and also go over, because we are talking about taxes, we want to be really clear on, what the ramifications of rolling the money over and what they'll be able to achieve with those. But the money usually what people see is that if they keep their money in the 401k, with the current tax rates, they're going to be paying 4 times the taxes, or the money goes much, much further in a tax-free environment. And in order to really kind of see that, we show them the illustrations of what that would look like. And it's pretty mind-blowing to look at that.
Yeah, I believe that. What would be some of the maybe common misconceptions that you see amongst investors, today as it relates to utilizing, the tax strategy of a whole term life insurance policy?
I think the biggest misconception is they're they talk about term insurance, and just like everything else in the financial world, things have changed and gotten better. And that's the case with the Index Universal Life. It's the only policy I would use, simply because of the liquidity with these policies is pretty phenomenal. You're able to borrow the money out of the policy at a 0% loan rate. That's the short end of it. It is also possible to keep this money invested in a index strategy that would allow you to borrow the money out and still make money in the investment. So the way that this money works is very, very cool.
Yeah. Well, this has been incredible, Stephanie. I really appreciate the value you've brought. Out of curiosity, what's kind of next for Stephanie Walters, either personally or professionally?
I'm lucky enough to have followed my wealthy investors and what they do with their money. So I was actually able to sell my agency in 2021. And I'm technically retired, but I do this because I truly believe in it. But I'm looking for investments that are passive and always learning, and that's what I love to do, is to help people have really change their perspective on the way that money works.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of value in that for sure. I don't know that the universities and high schools and financial advisors are really all in tune with all the different wealth building strategies and tax advantaged type vehicles that exist out there. So it's great to have people like you that find a passion really in educating others and providing value and serving them in that way. That said, what would maybe be one or two different ways that our listening audience can connect with you to learn more about what you're up to?
You could go to my website. I'm also on LinkedIn, but my website, which is www.erbewealth.com. I'm in the process of updating the website, so it may not be completely updated when you get there, but you can certainly connect with me. And I can, I love talking to people. Even I can't help everyone, but certainly like to point people in the right direction.
That's great. Well, we'll put those links in the show notes for sure. Stephanie, really appreciate you joining us on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And listening audience, thank you again for jumping into another episode of The Freedom Point. We look forward to having you join us on the next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the Freedom Point podcast, powered by Starting Point Capital. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decision, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the Freedom Point podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. If you're interested in connecting, you can find contact information at startingpointcapital.com.